While filming this classic, Joyce Randolph kept an intriguing aspect of her life hidden from the cast and crew. Her role as Trixie Norton was beloved, showcasing her ability to balance sweetness with a hint of sass. Yet, behind the scenes, she was navigating personal challenges that few were aware of. As production progressed, Randolph managed to embody the cheerful persona of Trixie while dealing with her own insecurities and pressures. In her private moments, she grappled with the contrast between her on-screen character's carefree spirit and her off-screen reality. This struggle made her performance resonate even more authentically, giving Trixie a depth that many may not have fully appreciated. Adding to the complexity, Joyce often found solace in the friendships she formed with her co-stars, who
There's
became
something
like
hauntingly beautiful about silence, especially when it hides decades of untold truths. Joyce Randolph, the woman America adored as the soft-spoken Trixie Norton on The Honeymooners, carried that silence for most of her life. She stood beside comedy legends, Jackie Gleason, Art Carney, Audrey Meadows. But behind the laughter, behind the warm black-and-white glow of television's golden age, Joyce was quietly fighting a battle few ever saw. She was the last one standing, the final heartbeat of an iconic cast. And when she finally began to speak, what she revealed changed everything we thought we knew about that legendary show. Joyce wasn't just playing the sweet neighbor. She was surviving a system that constantly reminded her of her place. The irony: The Honeymooners was hailed as a close-knit team, but for Joyce, it never felt that way. While her co-stars were granted spotlight moments and creative freedom, she was often left on the edge. Fewer lines, shorter scenes, and a silence that stretched well beyond the script. Some of that, Joyce later confessed, wasn't just coincidence. It was the way Jackie Gleason wanted it. She kept her head down, stayed professional, never stirred the pot. But time has a way of lifting the curtain. And in her later years, Joyce, with her trademark grace, started to reveal what it was really like to be the forgotten woman of television's most beloved sitcom. One question echoed louder than the laugh track. Why was she pushed aside? Long before she was a TV staple, Joyce Randolph was just another actress hustling through New York's unforgiving theater circuit. Born Joyce Sorolla in Detroit, she had earned her chops the hard way. Stage work, summer plays, and bit parts that paid just enough to keep chasing the dream. She wasn't flashy, she wasn't loud, and maybe that's what made her stand out. Gleason's team saw something in her: authenticity. No Hollywood gloss, no phony glitz. Just a natural presence that felt real. She didn't chase fame. Fame came to her, wrapped in the plaid wallpaper and working-class charm of The Honeymooners. When the role of Trixie Norton reopened, her screen test caught everyone off guard. She wasn't a scene stealer like Audrey Meadows, but she brought balance. A calm that grounded the chaos. Gleason liked that. But not everyone welcomed her with open arms. Not even Joyce herself. From the beginning, she had doubts. Trixie wasn't a leading role. She wasn't given meaty dialogue or emotional arcs. Sometimes, entire episodes passed without her presence. Joyce, trained in serious theater, questioned whether the role would limit her, and it did. But in an era where actresses rarely had the luxury to walk away from national TV, she stayed. And while cameras rolled, she smiled. Because in those days, smiling was survival. But deep down, she knew. She wasn't seen as an equal. Gleason and Carney controlled the rhythm of the show. Meadows held her ground and often pushed back when needed. Joyce? She played her part with elegance, but the unspoken message was clear. Stay in your lane. And that message followed her well beyond the final curtain call. On the surface, The Honeymooners was a love letter to blue-collar life, brimming with laughter and charm. Behind the scenes, however, was another story, one where Joyce never quite knew where she stood. Gleason, brilliant but notoriously unpredictable, refused to rehearse. His mood could shift without warning. He expected his cast to be ready for anything and took little responsibility for mistakes. Joyce, raised on discipline and structure, struggled with the chaos. She admitted later that she never felt truly secure, always wondering if she'd be written out, always questioning if she was measuring up. Meadows, with her quick wit and assertive energy, thrived in Gleason's world. Joyce, more reserved, became a background fixture. Insiders whispered that Gleason didn't fully trust her instincts. Whether that was true or not, the result was undeniable. Joyce's role was kept small, and it wasn't just Gleason. There was an invisible tension among the women. Publicly, Joyce and Audrey were cordial, smiling for cameras, standing shoulder to shoulder. But privately, the air was colder. They weren't enemies, but they weren't friends either. Audrey was the breakout star, the sharp-tongued wife who stole scenes. Joyce? She was often perceived as the quiet placeholder, essential to the formula, yet rarely celebrated. More than once, she found herself omitted without explanation. And when she did speak up, she was gently reminded of her position. Still, she stayed, loyal to the end, even as the spotlight passed her by. That loyalty, though admirable, came at a price. Years later, as the remaining cast passed away and fans clung to reruns, Joyce's voice finally began to rise above the scripted laughter. She didn't spill bitterness, she shared perspective. Her memories weren't attacked. Kindness was often overshadowed by control, and where legacy didn't always reward the quiet players. She had stories, subtle, emotional, often overlooked, about what it meant to be the one who stood at the edge of greatness, never quite invited in. And in those final interviews, she reminded the world that being in the background doesn't mean you were invisible. She carried a show that rarely carried her. She held grace where others wielded power. Room could derail everything she'd worked for. So, she kept silent. But silence has a cost. And in Joyce's case, it meant burying her own ambitions, her voice, and perhaps even her sense of self. As time went on, the more she watched reruns and heard stories about the honeymooners, the more the distance between public perception and private truth grew unbearable. That's when she started peeling back the curtain, slowly, thoughtfully, and with unmistakable grace. It wasn't a tell-all or some scandalous exposé. Joyce never attacked anyone. What she did was more subtle and more powerful. In one interview, she simply said, "People always thought I had it all figured out, but most days, I was just trying to keep up." That one line struck a nerve. It made fans revisit the show with new eyes. Suddenly, Trixie wasn't just the sweet, slightly underused sidekick. She was a symbol of all the women in television who never got to take center stage. Behind the laughter and applause, Joyce was fighting a quieter battle. She was working twice as hard just to stay visible in a room where decisions were made without her. And the moments that hurt the most? They weren't the scenes she lost, or the lines she never got to say. It was the feeling of being excluded from something she helped build. That feeling never quite went away. She would later describe it like walking past a house you once lived in. Familiar, full of memories, but no longer yours. The entertainment industry moved on, but Joyce never really stopped feeling like she was part of something that mattered. Even as casting directors passed her by and magazine covers ignored her, the fans never forgot. They wrote letters. They approached her at events. And each time, Joyce smiled warmly and said, "Thank you," even when the recognition came decades too late. Because what she valued most wasn't fame. It was being seen, being remembered. And when the world did remember her, even for a moment, it meant everything. In her final years, Joyce began speaking about the cost of silence. She talked about the way women were often asked to just be grateful, to smile through sidelining, to nod through dismissal. But she also talked about resilience. She said that holding back wasn't weakness. Sometimes it was survival. That sentiment resonated in ways she never could have imagined. Younger actors and longtime fans started looking at her story as something more than a footnote. It became a quiet testament to dignity in the face of neglect. And then came the final chapter, poignant, powerful, and long overdue. Joyce, the last living cast member of The Honeymooners, began receiving tributes not just for the role she played, but for the grace with which she endured everything behind it. There were online retrospectives, small-scale tributes, and fan-driven events that celebrated her not just as Trixie, but as Joyce Randolph, the woman who held her ground in a world that often overlooked her. One particular story stands out. A fan once asked her if she ever regretted taking the role. Joyce paused, smiled gently, and said, "No, because even if the role was small, it mattered to people. And that matters to me." That quiet humility, that clarity of heart, that's what defined her legacy more than any number of lines in a script. Yet even in her later recognition, there was a bitter sweetness that never fully faded. Joyce never stopped wondering what might have been if she'd been given more freedom, more complexity, more room to grow. She knew the industry was built to spotlight a few and sideline the rest. But still, it stung. And she never pretended otherwise. What Joyce left behind wasn't just a memory of a beloved character. She left behind a cautionary tale wrapped in warmth, laughter, and grace. A reminder that not every story we love on screen reflects the truth behind it. Sometimes, the quietest cast members carry the heaviest weight. And sometimes, the most enduring performances are the ones we almost miss. When Joyce passed away, tributes poured in. Not from Hollywood's elite, but from everyday viewers, people who grew up watching her, who saw her kindness in those short scenes and felt seen themselves. They spoke of how she brought something grounding, something gentle to the chaos of The Honeymooners. And they weren't just mourning a character, they were mourning the woman who gave her life, even when no one was watching. And so, Joyce Randolph's story closes not with a dramatic final bow, but with a lingering presence. A reminder that behind every laugh track, there's a human being hoping to be more than just background noise. Her quiet strength, her endurance through invisibility, and her grace under pressure didn't just make her memorable, they made her unforgettable. And now, after decades of being the forgotten honeymooner, Joyce is finally taking center stage, not in the spotlight, but in the hearts of those who finally heard her story. She stayed quiet for decades, not because she had nothing to say, but because she knew that sometimes speaking up too soon could come at too high a cost. Joyce Randolph had been the picture of restraint, both on screen and off. As Trixie Norton, she was the steady presence beside television giants. But in real life, she was often left on the margins, quietly absorbing the tension behind the camera, while the rest of the world was charmed by the illusion. Years passed, the show became legend, and the other stars took their final bows. And something changed in Joyce. With nothing left to lose, she let go of the silence that had followed her for half a century. What emerged wasn't rage, it was revelation. She didn't name names or throw accusations. Instead, she peeled back the layers of nostalgia, offering something much more haunting, the quiet ache of being forgotten. People wanted to remember the show a certain way, she said, and I didn't want to ruin that. But the warmth fans remembered on screen, it didn't always match the reality backstage. She had been left out of decisions, left out of tributes, left out of history. And she carried that weight with remarkable grace. She wasn't bitter, but she was honest. And in that honesty, she found her voice, one that echoed more powerfully than any laugh track ever could. The strange part is, Joyce never disappeared. She remained in New York, living in the same modest apartment she'd occupied for decades. No Beverly Hills mansion, no paparazzi, just a quiet life steeped in simplicity. And yet, even as the industry moved on without her, she stayed connected to fans, to memories, to the truth. Her later interviews had a rhythm of reflection. She shared behind-the-scenes moments with surprising clarity. The nerves of live television, the pressure to get it right the first time, the feeling of being essential yet invisible. People always ask about Jackie or Art, she mused once. No one ever really asked about me. That single line said everything. But perhaps the most stunning moment came not from what she remembered, but how she remembered it. She didn't cling to resentment. She smiled through the stories, even the painful ones. She laughed about the quirks of working live, but the laughter was different now, more knowing, more layered. At fan conventions, her appearances felt like homecomings. She was no longer just Trixie. She was a living reminder of what had been lost in the noise. And each time she took the stage, the crowd would rise, not just for her character, but for her courage. And just when we thought we'd heard everything from her, she gave us one last lesson. In the final stretch of her life, she spoke more plainly. The missed opportunities, the roles she never got, the times she watched as tributes rolled in for others while her name was left out. It was a gift, she said of the show, but not an easy one. That kind of wisdom doesn't come overnight. It's the product of years of watching, waiting, and understanding what it means to be a background figure in someone else's spotlight. But Joyce, she didn't need a spotlight. Her truth was luminous enough. Behind that quiet composure was a woman who had weathered Hollywood's cold shoulder. And yet, when you look closely, her life wasn't lacking in richness. It just took a different form. Joyce didn't live in excess, but she built her financial world with care. She had investments in classic theater productions and co-owned a small publishing company focused on vintage television memoirs. Though she never flaunted wealth, Joyce owned a discreet yet refined collection of luxury. A 1989 Mercedes-Benz convertible she kept in mint condition, a classic Cartier tank watch gifted during her Broadway days, and a modest yet valuable Manhattan co-op in the Upper East Side. While she didn't travel by private jet, she was known to enjoy private rail excursions along the Northeast Corridor, preferring timeless elegance over flashy displays. Her health and legacy were protected by comprehensive insurance policies, ones that covered not just medical needs, but appearance-related clauses for rare public events. In truth, Joyce mastered the art of quiet wealth, preserved, protected, and never paraded. And perhaps that's the most underrated kind of success there is. The real lesson she left behind wasn't about fame. It was about knowing your worth, even when others failed to see it. Joyce taught us that longevity isn't just about staying in the game. It's about staying true to yourself. She showed that grace, when paired with quiet resilience, could outlast even the loudest voices in the room. Her story isn't just one of forgotten credits. It's a blueprint for surviving in an industry that often values flash over substance. And in today's Hollywood, where overnight fame vanishes almost as quickly as it arrives, Joyce's steady presence feels more revolutionary than ever. In the final pages of her life, Joyce didn't rewrite history. She simply added the chapters that had been left out. She gave us a fuller picture of what it meant to be Trixie. Not just the sidekick, not just the smile, but the woman who watched it all, felt it all, and, at last, told it all. Her story reminds us that some voices take time to be heard. But when they are, they change everything. Joyce's passing didn't just close a chapter. It turned a spotlight back on all the quiet ones, the ones Hollywood forgot to thank. And now, maybe for the first time, we're finally listening.